realism. Furthermore, he mentions size for empowerment. Citizens come together and fight against discrimination. At the same time, they try to save the dream city, which encourages multiculturalism, where transparent and inclusive practices concerning social issues are taking place, and every individual can negotiate his place in this newly formed society. Moreover, Sorkin believes that the best way to deal with the lack of public space is the seizure of the streets. Pedestrians and flaneurs should be prioritized in a city that enables accidental meetings. For this research, except reviews, semi-structured interviews took place via Skype and emails. Based on the topic that discusses ideas such as public space, architecture, civil matters, and participatory design, architects, urbanists, and urban professors, as well as the former vice mayor of civil society and innovation in Athens, were the ideal candidates. The interviewees were free to build upon the given questions and elaborate on their answers. Usually, these communications lasted around 40 minutes. I also formed a quick questionnaire. The questions varied from very general concerning life in the neighborhood to very specific concerning specific contemporary urban Athenian projects. In the last decade, scholars are also concerned about the publicness of public space. Due to terrorism, as well as the rise of criminality, there is a need for extra security. However, strict boundaries, fences, guards, and multiple surveillance systems slightly transform traditional public spaces. If space is securitized, how shared participation and open access for all are achieved? In contemporary societies, the most vibrant and secure public spaces are privately owned. People claim their rights when occupying the streets and protest. Therefore, if access is limited, then the citizens are deprived of fundamental rights and liberties. How public is public space? If space is public, does it mean that everyone can access it at any time? Public space could be examined as a big network and not as units. If one person doesn't want to go to a certain public space because of many reasons, such as the concentration of minorities or homeless people, does it mean that the space is not inclusive? Should personal beliefs and aesthetics affect our understanding of what a public space should look like? What is the ideal for one may be appalling for someone else. After all, the idea that public space is for everyone is a bit romantic and not realistic. We have to keep in mind that no city can be built in a way that is perfect for everybody. Cities are places of negotiation. People make cities to live in them. Cities belong to the people, but people have both rights and responsibilities. Can you change a piece of the city without consulting the society as a whole? No neighborhood is isolated by itself. A neighborhood is part of something bigger. That means if you make a change, you affect the bigger picture as well. Pop-up urbanism is also known as tactical urbanism and is used to describe the temporary transformation of roads into markets, the squatting of empty buildings, and the use of empty stores for short-term art galleries. In other words, it describes every kind of spontaneous intervention in the city and touches upon discussions concerning the use and allocation of public space. Pop-up urbanism doesn't have architects. It comes spontaneously. It is the antithesis of the architect and the planner. Architects can participate in chair bombing and things like that, but if you say a plan is needed, then you are immediately making it formal. Citizens should feel free to express their own thoughts and creativity. They should feel free that they are heard and be encouraged to participate in civic organizations. People should express their wishes to architects and planners, but architects and planners sometimes have expertise which is not easy to communicate. Sometimes their idea might be really complex. In participatory processes, not every citizen can be involved to the full extent. Moreover, no matter the extent of participation, at some point, you need someone to make the decision. We have to have in front of us a specific protocol of how this practice is taking place. There must be rules of engagement. Who provides what? In this participation, is this participation a paid one or not? Participatory design often involves the middle-class white male agenda. The driving force of every project must be the bottom-up participation of the most end users as possible, as a representative team is enough. Instead, they, architects, are trained to impose a certain set of images which go against the user's needs and imagination. Nevertheless, as Platon Isaias argues, it's naive to think that participatory design ambitions are innocent. After all, who gets to decide what participation means and who is eligible enough for this kind of process? Is anyone excluded? They are power relations that are camouflaged. Moreover, who is in charge and decides where participatory interventions are needed the most? Are the intentions clear and the procedures transparent? Architects are also citizens. They're not out of the social, cultural, and political and class context. We do not exist as a we, architects. What we enable has to do with who we are. Furthermore, Ryan Enos adds a very important aspect of the role of the architects. Designers have an obligation to speak for the people that are the least powerful in society. These people, like homeless people, from the design process, but architects should enable them to speak for themselves. Finally, architects are facilitators. They, along with other engineers and urbanists, should be able to bridge the gap between bottom-up and top-down processes. In the past, this gap in this design process was supported by different NGOs. The sample of the survey is random. 117 people answered the self-completion questionnaire. When asked what is missing most from their areas, the majority stated greenery, while a considerable number of respondents replied that there are not enough parking spots or clear spaces. In addition, many people claimed that they noticed a lack of urban furniture. According to the findings of the survey, the respondents seem to be satisfied enough from. When asked about the role of the architect in participatory processes and civic matters, more than half of the participants indicated leading. Unexpectedly, at the same time, at the question below about the role of citizens in participatory processes, the highest percentage argued that the citizen should be the ones that lead such processes. Subsequently, the distinction of roles is not clear. Finally, the participants were also asked if they were satisfied with two large urban projects in the center of Athens that were both finalized during the social distancing period. The first one is the new layout of Omonia Square, one of the most historic Greek plazas. The responses were moderate, with 40% of them stating that they are neither satisfied nor dissatisfied. 15% of the participants stated clear dissatisfaction. This project received harsh criticism from architects as it wasn't constructed under transparent processes. The other important urban project that was involved in the questionnaire was the Great Walk of Athens. According to this project, some road lanes of the central transport network were given to pedestrians and cyclists. This project was also launched during the Greek lockdown and social distancing. It was legalized in the name of the decongestion of central Athens as an attempt to confine traffic and the spread of the virus. This project's regulation indicates that this is a temporary layout as a measure to protect public health. Why such a project received bad criticism too? The participants of the survey were not much satisfied with this project. In fact, almost 1/3 of the participants declared dissatisfaction, while another third showed a lack of enthusiasm and appeared too apathetic. For Professor Isaias, the Great Walk of Athens, as it is now, it's more of colors on the ground than of a sophisticated project. Furthermore, as it has also been said by others, he criticizes the great cost of the plants that surround the project and that have died due to the heat and the extremely hot temperatures of the Greek summer. He argues the problem of the Great Walk of Athens isn't that it tests something. The problem is how and the ambitions behind it. It was done to boost Airbnb. This project has been accepted in the government gazette as a project that helps the state of emergency of the pandemic. It is a project not of a public space, it's a project of securitization. In contemporary societies, one way to make public space and the neighborhood more friendly and welcoming is to promote the idea of guerrilla urbanism and make the inhabitants designers temporarily. The DIY mentality inspired great projects. Architects are there to help and guide the citizens. Pop-up initiatives with participatory principles is an ideal condition for contemporary society. Nevertheless, even participation can be exclusive. Who gets to participate? Who affords to participate? A lawless urban grid existing even before the crisis. Athens was facing urbanization without industrialization, as mentioned above. There was a state of anomie and informality. In that context, and a few years after the millennium, citizens started to claim their city back. Pop-up urbanism solution appeared as the ideal way to regenerate gradually the neighborhoods. The face of the neighborhood was changing from the inside. Moreover, the problem with Greece is that it is a country with endless bureaucracy, and citizens have always searched for ways to express their dissatisfaction with the state. In this context, how feasible can be the projects of civic society? The Athenians are used to realize projects with private sponsorships. That is why it is very hard for the organizations to patent their projects and replicate them across the urban grid. The state doesn't want to be involved and be responsible if anything goes wrong. That is why most projects, even if they're exemplary and functional, die after a certain period. The questionnaire declared dissatisfaction and an apathy towards the newly introduced Great Walk of Athens. Why such an urban project that resembles a lot of other European urban regeneration attempts got bad reviews? Maybe the financial crisis left Greek people miserable and they do not appreciate such initiatives. Or maybe this Great Walk serves political interests and declares the superiority of the new Greek government and its mayor. It may be used to test the capacity of the Greek capital for such initiatives. However, such a big intervention, no matter how transportable or reversible it may be, it should have been tested by specialists and be better organized. As for the roads it will affect. Moving forward, the big fountain, as well as the general layout of Ammonia Square, was a cause of dispute among the Athenians. More specifically, some think of it as an Instagrammable plaza and an empty cell. Thank you.
Thank you, Nafsika. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. And because we're running against the clock, we're gonna go on with Dimitra Siatitsa, from CoHab team.
It's here too.
Okay, yeah.
We do share screen. Ah. Good evening. Let's take this off. I'm very happy to be here. It's my first live presence conference after 2 years, so I'm very excited about it and happy to be with you. I'm part of a CoHab team, and there are two more members in the room, Constantina and Dimitris, and I hope much more through the web. I'm going to very quickly present you a project we have been working for the last 2 years, which seem 1 year due to the pandemic. CoHab meets MOBA. First, a few words about us. We are a team. We were of urban researchers and activists. We were formed in 2016, and we were interested in exploring alternative collective housing models for Athens, inspired by projects that we learned about and we visited in Europe. We wanted to discuss how cooperative and collaborative models could be transferred and translated in Athens in a Greek context. Very briefly, since there's no time to really talk about that, but cooperative housing models are houses under shared ownership and collective democratic management. So we thought that this would be a really good case to explore in a context where Greece was in crisis and where housing problems were emerging, really were affecting really broader parts of the population. We thought this could provide a viable solution for access to decent, secure, and affordable housing in a collective, self-organized way, with active involvement of members based on solidarity and mutual support, by mobilizing collective resources and using alternative funding sources, as usually these kind of projects do, like crowdfunding, direct loans, and ethical funding. I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but there is a noise. Okay, εγώ ακούω ηχό. Ακούω ένα βόμβο μάλλον. We also thought that this kind of approach to housing would provide a very, good potential to use urban resources, available urban resources, and especially vacant housing and empty buildings, and use them collectively for a common good. And also as a way to create community bonds at the neighborhood level and promote in a collective way neighborhood upgrading and development. We were particularly interested in rental cooperatives, a model that does not require equity from the members, so it's more suitable in cases where people do not have initial capital, they do not have the money to invest, not even a small amount of money or a smaller amount than it would be required, for example, to buy a owned house. And I cannot go into more detail about that, but we're working on material that can be available also in Greek and on our site. So during this journey since 2016, I didn't mention, in order to do that, we organized different workshops, we did field visits, we did knowledge exchange meetings with both groups in Athens and Greece, but also abroad. And in this journey, we met members of MOBA, and we thought that it would be really nice to strengthen our connection with this particular network of initiatives. It's a network of initiatives that are from cities and countries of Southeast and Center East Europe. And we felt when talking with them that we shared a lot in terms of a common context, common understanding, particularly in relation to the specific housing challenges that people and young people particularly were facing in these countries, the lack of alternative or social housing options that people have both in Greece and in their countries as well, and the growing affordability crisis. So we applied for a small grant from a crowdfunding grassroots network, an alternative funding source, the Fund Action Grant. And we got it 2 years ago in order to organize a more structured exchange that would initially, as I will explain, included field visits, but due to the pandemic, we didn't manage to do that. Just a few words about MOBA. At the moment, MOBA is a network of 5 core members. from countries from Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Czech Republic, and and Hungary. And they also, at some point, they're all groups that are trying to pilot and develop cooperative housing in their countries. And at some point, they met together and decided to join forces. They decided also to form a European cooperative society, an interesting tool provided by the EU institutional framework on cooperatives that allows, let's say, to have a greater visibility, access to EU funds, a better negotiating power with international or EU institutions, even banks for a loan, but also in order to collectively develop common tools and resources that can be shared by the members. These are all small projects, small groups on a voluntary basis. So it's really important for them to learn on their own how they can develop such complex, in a way, projects producing a cooperative housing in an environment where it does not provide any institutional or funding tools. So they decided that they would become the experts on their own by peer-to-peer exchange, by learning from other projects, by meeting, going and visiting, as we also did, all projects that are already in place in different places, such as the network of Mietshäuser Syndikat in Germany, a rental cooperative network, the very strong model of cooperatives in Zurich, or new emerging models of municipally supported cooperatives in Barcelona. Okay. I will very quickly go through these pilot projects, since there's no time to talk about them, and just tell you where we are now with these projects. As I said, we didn't manage to do the field visit. The goal is to provide material for that can be publicly accessible and that can nurture the dialogue here in Greece, and that can, let's say, provide material for this community of dialogue that we have been trying to generate during the last years. What we did was online interviews, and we are now at the process of editing short videos that will present each project and the MOBA project as a collective project altogether. Well, the interviews will provide information about the story. We were particularly interested on how these groups were formed, how did they manage, where are they now, where did they manage to get until now, what kind of support tools they have used, what are the problems they have faced. They're all in a very different trajectories. And as we, as CoHab, we also faced during especially the pandemic, and given that we are all on a voluntary base, is that we find that it's difficult to give more time. It was difficult to keep the project going without physical contact. So let's say these 2 years that have passed with CoHab meets MOBA project seems less than one. And just to close, some points that we think are important in this process is first that somehow we share some common understandings about the context in which these projects are to be developed, the prevalence of home ownership, the role of the family, the market options, that proximity and the direct contact is very important. for them also being in a region, in a quite close region and well-connected region of Europe, gave them the opportunity to meet often and in person and have personal involvement among them. And it was also important to connect with the international and European platforms and organizations that gave visibility, technical support, resources, and some funding for these options. And finally, just to say that we hope we will be soon able to upload the material on our site. And we hope, and if you're interested, you can be connected and keep it in mind that in May, we will probably manage to bring these groups here in Athens to have this knowledge exchange meeting and be able to discuss more in depth with them about the challenges and perspectives of such models. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Thanks a lot, Dimitra. I think we got Eftychios Protopapadakis online.
Yes, that is correct. Good
Perfect.
afternoon.
So we can move on now to your speech. So are you ready?
Yes, please. I will start sharing my screen then and stopping the video feed to simplify things. So share screen, the entire screen, and here we are. Perfect. So I assume that you can see my screen.
Yes, perfectly. And we can hear you.
Thank you, thank you. So in this case, without further delays, it's a pleasure being here today. Today's topic is about challenges. I mean, to this day, all of us know that nature-based solutions are beneficial in multiple ways for our well-being. Nevertheless, the core problem remains the same. What are the challenges and in which way should we consider current constraints to create something better? The general concept is that we have on the one hand the city growth challenges, and on the other hand, we have the planning strategies, and there is a mismatch between these two. And that meaning that any adopting methodologies can be beneficial to some domain, but they are lacking in some other. So behind the EFPOLIS project, we try to identify any new opportunities that would lead the design process in a way that we could, at the same time, improve sustainability, provide climate resilience, and of course, always check for cost efficiency. This is a blue-green systems approach. And the idea as a flowchart is straightforward. We always should start by explicitly defining the current goals and targets. Once we do that, we then can proceed to things like existing concepts, and then step by step, we can proceed to check what kind of facilities we have available, evaluate the solutions, green or blue solutions that can be applied, and then create a master plan which has by default a detailed design. In the meantime, there is always the possibility for the definition of indicators, further indicators, which will help us understand better the targets. And at the end of the day, we have to quantify the existing process. This sounds complicated, but at the end of the day, we need to simultaneously consider multiple things. So we start creating matrices. These matrices may refer to interactions. You will see below what that means, each of these matrices. They can refer to climate resilience, cost savings, blending, gender, business activation, long-term functionality, and of course, scaling matrices. That means that if we are able to simultaneously build up 8 matrices, we have a very good way to evaluate alternative solutions, taking under consideration everything for our case. So this is the idea. We have ecosystem services, we have variability, we have many alternative solutions. And as you can see, all of these are strongly interrelated to each other. So any scheduling in one of these dimensions will, by default, affect and all the other ones. So instead of starting by considering each one of them separately, we need to entangle them together as a whole. And at the end of the day, to deliver a blue-green solution which will have the best social impact. To do that, we must somehow quantify these interactions. For example, if we are talking about water, it does not matter if we are talking about availability or flooding, we are talking about water. So we need to consider multiple things regarding the climate resilience. And all these multiple things may involve dry periods, change in availability, regional differences, but no matter which are the indicators, we were able to provide a corresponding improvement measure. And sometimes this is a problem, but there are alternatives. And once we have the first suggestions and we have alternatives to choose, we can then go straight ahead for the cost savings. I mean, for good or bad, for any blue-green solution suggested, there is probably another not so environmentally friendly solution that can be applied. And in many cases, these alternatives have a lower cost, but in the long-term duration, a greater effect in the worst case, I mean. So we need to compare those solutions, component by component, and start enumerating all possible benefits so that we will be able to distinguish the total benefits and be sure before we take any suggestion. So another problem that we are always facing is to set up the trade-offs among benefits or try to estimate what the citizens would like to see as benefits. And of course, there is always the blend-in matrix. Practically speaking, when we are trying to implement any kind of solution, this solution will be implemented in a specific area. So if we don't interact with the people there and take under consideration the local structure and needs, any solution, no matter how good it sounds, it will probably fail because it did not take under consideration the current constraints. This is what we are talking about, blend-in matrices. And of course, this should be one of the approval criteria. Nevertheless, and we should not forget that, we should start by enumerating few things, answering questions like, who do you plan for? And then, to the extent that is possible due to time or resource constraints, we start separating and characterizing individual characteristics. I mean, we can talk about social groups, we are talking about the age or the sex. We are taking under consideration if there are special needs and start counting and see how many of them are and how they will be affected. And of course, we also check the viability. Viability of a solution is always one of the major problems. So the idea is to see how well this proposed solution or this planning approach can actually be beneficial to the businesses. This is again a multiple phase process in which we must consider which are the local resources, existing resources, and then see how well these resources can be integrated with the existing procedures. And then it's very likely that there will be multiple new business opportunities beneficial to everyone. At any case, and this is a must to these days, we should always consider the long-term functionality of any planned solutions. Planners are responsible for that. Speaking of what? Speaking of this, it's a good idea to identify first some critical functionalities, be able to quantify or check about extreme operational or climatic conditions. And then when we know or we have a significant amount of information on that topics, we should address the problems and check if the proposed solutions are able to mitigate such effects, are able to withstand such cases or not. And then you can see that in this process, we have faced already multiple problems. However, at any step, each new problem that appears will be considered in terms of effect to the other dimensions of the modeling. In order to summarize, I would like to emphasize that, as you already know, any nature-based solutions requires simultaneously consideration of multiple aspects. And of course, there will be numerous requirements that need to get priority levels. Of course, these requirements are extracted by incorporating in the planning process the local habitants. This is a must. At any case, before the planners proceed to any suggestions, we should also quantify and distinguish multiple categories, including the urban development, environmental, and of course, social and businesses. Then, and this is a first step, there are procedures that can incorporate simultaneously all of the above. And by trial and error, we can improve these procedures and be able to deliver in maybe 1 or 2 years a detailed workflow plan, a know-how process, which in the long term will be beneficial to many people. That was my presentation. If you need any further details, please go ahead and visit our site, our project sites, or send us a mail. This is the easy thing to do today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eftychios. Sorry for in the room, the size of the PowerPoint is really small, but I'm sure you can actually see the slides online because the whole session will be uploaded. So, okay. Now we can move on to the next presentation from Miguel Angel Palacios Carrasco, Susta.
Yeah.
talking about reimagining railway stations, competition, research to action. And of course, keep your question if you got any question. I'm guess yes, and we'll see at the end if we got some time for discussion. Thank you. I will copy that. This is this one.
No, yeah, no problem. It's a window, maybe? Okay.
Take. Okay, thanks.
So, good night. My name is Miguel Carrasco. I'm a Brazilian architect. I'm one of the authors of this project entitled From Research to Action that was developed for the occasion of an international competition. International competition that was organized by the Royal Institute of British Architects between 2020 and 2021. And after being selected among more or less 200 submissions in the first phase, was an open international first phase, we were selected among one of the 5 finalists. And to develop this proposal, we established a partnership with the engineer company Arab from London. It was more or less the team. The competition challenged the competitors to develop proposals applicable to different scales and contexts, either rural or urban, and to interpret the train station as a vector of sustainable social and economic development. We immediately understood that the output of this contest should not be in a specific design, but a methodology that should guide the transformation of the existing and new stations into community hubs. So we try to develop a solution that synthesizes data from a technical analysis and combine it with a public participation process, allowing the transformation of tangible and intangible demands into feasible design strategies. The answer for that was the development of a design tool that could incorporate the tangible and intangible data that could be collected through this process. We named this tool the implementation map platform. One of the examples of this technical analysis that we proposed was a parameter mapping. During the process of studying the 2,000 small and medium train stations in UK, we identified recurring parameters regarding architecture and urban matters. These parameters would serve as an instrument of analysis to address specific design strategies on the renewal and construction of new stations, such as heritage or structural condition, the condition of the unbuilt area around the station, how the neighborhoods can interact with the station, or the physical relation between the station and the railway, the way to cross the railway, and for instance, the sustainable energy potential that could be addressed to the design of the station, and the possibility of integration between the streets around the station and the station itself. So every answer of these parameters will be related to design strategies together with community participation inputs. And although we recognize the importance of the collection of the referred data, it became an understanding that we needed to develop a design tool that could not only replicate, but adapt our design system based not only on physical attributes, but on public interaction. But how to do it? How could we stabilize a truly participatory process that could allow the small and medium train stations to become closer to communities, not only in UK, but why not all over the world? So in the beginning of this process, I have a video, but I don't know if it should be played. Maybe. It's a video. No, it's a video. Yeah, but it's not sharing. No, it's not. You don't have this video. It's not a problem. Let's come back here. Okay. So in the beginning of this process, we presented the interaction with the community mainly through a digital process that will be developed based on the already existing network rail app. And we imagined that it could enlarge the idea of the platform, this platform that already exists, in order to become a technological interface between the community and the network rail. But at the following phases of the process, we expanded the concept of the collective participation by taking it beyond the screens and activating local stakeholders in each community. So the territory became this layered map of mobilizing possibilities. The overall concept of the participatory process was finally structured into 2 steps, taking place both virtually and live. The first step has a more spontaneous and free participatory method, and the second one has a more objective one, made through voting forms that would then address design strategies. Parallel to that, the Network Rails app would improve to become a technological interface between community and the network rail, receiving useful data from train users' interaction. So the first step would be a more spontaneous method, trying to avoid inducing answers or solutions with strategies such as the wall of desires that could be, for instance, panels placed in strategic sites around the city that would receive free suggestions for the renewal or construction of new stations. And for instance, we also proposed local workshops taking place in the community centers around the station or at the existing station itself with debates and activities. These workshops would be centered on three main themes: users, perceptions, and placemaking. For the first theme, the uses, we wanted to understand what what are the programmatic needs from the community? Talking about the perception, we try to explore the subjective feelings such as security, warming, wellness. And for the topic of placemaking, we want to have information about the identity of the community in the city. For example, should we take in consideration the buildings typology around, or a specific trick that there is on the site? And all this process, of course, will be done simultaneously of the network Rails existing app. So this mobilization will result in a lot of information regarding people interests, suggestions, and thoughts. The challenge here is to transform those free responses into targeted points that will address the design strategies. And for that, we may have made a second step on our participatory process. In this step, the network rail, there is the train company in UK, and the design team will present relevant options from step 1 regarding the station future activities and take them to public vote and collect points in the app. And the tangible and intangible data that will be collected here would finally be synthesized in 3 different diagrams: the users map, the perceptions map, and the placemaking map. By absorbing the tangible and intangible data that we just presented, we build a basis for modeling and parameterization, assigning parameters to the structural elements, surfaces, infrastructure, and activities. We introduce parameterization in order to systematize the design process to the physical and non-physical, so every project decision can be analyzed, changed, and tested over and over. Through a kit of parts concept, the proposed system is capable of efficiently absorbing the output data achieved from the research and community participation process. A modular wood system, catalogs of green infrastructure and accessibility solutions, new furniture design, and multifunctional surfaces create a new network of sustainable solutions that address not only environmental, but also economic and social issues, adapting each station to each specific community inputs. This tool is not intended to produce automatic design responses, not like that. Its purpose is to serve as a tool for designers and stakeholders to maximize the design process. The parameterization here is concerned not only to the building, but to the methodology as a whole. Our architectural response is a modular system with a small scale, with models for 5 meters per 5 meters, 5 meters per 5 meters, with some variations. This flexibility makes it possible to experiment widely with the structure form. From the basic structure model, it is possible to build simple and pragmatic shelters to compensate innovative forms, allowing the structural design to respond to the participatory process inputs. With a modular system, there is also the opportunity for additional space to be added to the station in time, such as the station evolves through its lifetime to meet the changing needs of the community. In addition to the primary infrastructure generated by the various combinations of the structural model, we propose a catalog of architectural solutions aimed at green infrastructure, universal inclusion, programmatic diversity, and flexible appropriation. The proposed green infrastructure solutions represent a network of sustainable solutions that address not only environment, but also economic and social issues. The catalog of modular furniture represents a basic furniture kit that can be organized in different ways, generating spatial compositions unique to each station. The entire set of internal partitions is thought as programmatic surfaces, vertical elements that support activities in activating and transforming space strategically. We presented also some small-scale scenarios of existing stations to demonstrate how strategic insertion of some elements of the catalog could transform the space for the better and the enhanced community ownership. So after one of 2 initial design proposals based on community demands, the technical research parameters, we bring them to public debate. So we bring the community again to the process. The idea here is to bring the community during the process of a design making in order to avoid design process that only take interest in participatory design before or after the project is complete. In order to not limit the discussion about the architectural object only to its aesthetic aspects, We propose to present some data and quantities of the project so every citizen can understand the urban impact of their next station. By providing quantities regarding the energy demand and how much we can store, the carbon equilibrium time for the construction, and the water storage capacity, the drainage surface area on the site, and so on, we raise the level of discussion and awareness of what stations can become to the. Our parametric process will allow for post-construction analysis regarding technical parameters and structural behavior during time to be absorbed into that project code, facilitating maintenance operation in future construction, as well as train user feedbacks through the engagement that we just presented. And then we understand the end of this process, so to speak, not as the achievement of the physical construction of the station, but has a social engagement that will keep the path to consolidate the station as a community hub. In the end, we finished third among the finalists, and our project is not going to be developed in the first moment, but we believe that it is important to share with you this extensive research and work they have been done during 6 months, more or less, with a group of experts from different areas who were able to contribute with an architectural, systematic, and urbanistic approach to public participation from the scale of the neighborhood to the scale of territory. Thank you very much. So, who is? Thank you.
So thank you very much, Miguel. I'm just checking the chat. Okay, that was the question I saw on the chat for Nafsika, but she had to leave. But we have the question emailed. Okay, and I'm really sorry for the slides that we cannot see actually. But okay, we will have all of this material online. And I'm happy to welcome Meryl Sineus, my friend, here in Athens, for the last speech of this session. Really sorry for the delay, but because we begin with 20 minutes late due to delay of the previous session. So we're gonna have, if it's possible, a 10-minute presentation at the end from Meryl. Okay, so. And I don't know if we can have some questions at the end, discussion, okay, we'll see. So I'm just leaving the microphone for Mary. Yeah, of course.
Closer, closer. It's okay? All right. First of all, I would like to thank the team of Participatory Lab and Sylvain here for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here in person for my first time in Athens, so I'm very happy. As the time for the presentation is very short, I will be available afterwards if some people have questions about the projects I will present today, very briefly. So I'm an architect and a teacher in the School of Architecture in Paris, France, and I'm going to talk about 3 projects I've participated to during the 5 years, since 4-5 years. I will try to address the way the architects are working today in vulnerable contexts, in precarious contexts of habitat. As for me, I try to be committed as an architect, but differently, meaning alongside vulnerable communities based on their demands and not exclusively on a top-down agenda as it's usually done in that kind of context. So, so starting from the topic of this conference, which is focused on climate change, I must say that I feel very concerned, some kind of ecological anxiety, as we say now, by the fact that both architecture and urban planning, by jobs, so to say, are major consumers of resources and producers of CO2, and are also directly involved in the issues of spatial and social injustice, which are also, we know, the food for climate change. And so as an architect, I ask myself, what can I do in the places, in the cities where inequalities and where housing vulnerabilities are increasing? So it seems to me that it's more and more necessary to change the usual way of doing architecture. We have to use the skills of the architects in a different way. It has to be, for me, I think more about listening, about repairing, about caring, about improving the conditions of life as a whole, not only on a technical level, but also on a social level, in a collective and more inclusive way. I mean, it's big words to start this presentation, but I promise I will try to be more down to earth for the rest of my presentation. I've noticed since several years of being involved in a project in vulnerable contexts that I think that the act of transforming space, the act of building, of restoring, which can be felt sometimes as brutal or disrupting, these moments are also an opportunity to consider the inhabitants as legitimate actors of the transformation of their places. And it's even more relevant when it's inhabitants that are vulnerabilized by the society around. A construction site is, for example, an opportunity to build together, and through the act of doing together, looking for the future with more confidence and mobilizing the resources to make it change in a way. So I will go now over 3 different projects. And in doing so, over 3 different topics or issues for these projects. These 3 projects are all in the suburbs of Paris, so-called banlieue in French. I will go quickly over the first project I want to show to you. I was asked as an architect, with the normal mission of an architect, to build a new place of accommodation to rehouse families that were living in a slum, in self-built houses on a shared gardens area. The project was initiated by a local NGO based on a public initiative and public funding. So in a fairly classical top-down way, but several aspects I want to show you today make the project a little bit more interesting. So the first aspect is that unlike the usual public action in direction to slums in France, that evicts the slums very far to make them, in a way, disappear. Here we worked on the same area and the self-built houses in the gardens. And see the photos here. The families could keep the bounds they already had with the school, the social centers of the city, etc. So we started from the slum. We based the new project on it, on the existing situation, which is considered as a stage in the family's life path. It's a very important statement for us to say that the slum is considered as a place of resources. Ouais, c'est bien. Okay. Being for some people the only way to access to the city, the first step to access to it. The second aspect is also that unlike the projects of shelter centers in France, which are carried out in a hurry, very fast, here we took time, about 3 years, to co-design the project and to build it in 4 different phases. You can see here the 4 different buildings. And by doing that, giving the community formed by the families and the NGO team the time to build itself as a community at the same time as the physical place was being built too. I'll quickly show the images here of the co-design process, the workshop with the young people of the slum, with the members of the NGO, trying to make a master plan for the group of houses, telling about the uses, making surveys, etc. I go very fast. Many ideas came out: a collective kitchen, a grocery shop, a place to make jams from the fruits of the gardens, a water fountain, etc. The third aspect, and was really a challenge for us as architects, was to set up a building that can be easily modified. First of all, it has to be possibly completely dismantled and reassembled in another place, because it's a temporary installation for some kind of juridical reasons. So we choose to work with wood, and for some parts of the building, the facades, we prefabricated some modules that can be moved and installed by 2 people only, very light modules and easy to carry. We design a structure which is also easy to understand. It's easy to understand how is it constructed, and so easy to transform it, to cut it, to move it, to paint it, to anyway. We also created a space that can evolve in time by opening or closing some doors, modifying some wood partitions. You can expand some of the dwelling according to the size of the families, for example. I go very fast with the many details, so it's kind of complicated, but anyway, you can just understand more or less what it is about. It was also a very special project because it is completely tailor-made. We really wanted to show that it was possible with the same budget to do something different from modular emergency housing blocks made with piles of, construction site bungalows that we usually in such shelter centers we usually see. Okay. I go very quick with the images, but we don't have so much time. Second project I wanted to show to you is also in the suburbs of Paris, in the south this time, and also concerns a slum. I was part of an activist action carried out by an association called Peru, and which is rather from political arts background. We worked for 2 years in this shanty town in a totally illegal context and way of doing things. The first objective here was to describe the situation of these families and to show it with different medias, as for me with the skill, the tools of the architects, so that it can be taken into account by local social services, among many other things. We met each of the families with the idea of getting to know better, not only the physical characteristics of the places, the self-built houses, but also the sociology of the families, the people's backgrounds and histories. So we had to go beyond the homogenizing point of view that is common in this kind of survey. Second objective was to create the means to look at this situation in a different way, more positive and more forward-looking. You can see here different moments and media we have been co-creating with the families, for example, exchanging with other children in the city, in schools, parties, moments of conviviality, concerts, cinema, moments also of building together. Here was the main hall for the shantytown. We wrote with the people 2 books. We made a film. We made a greeting card for the end of the year, CVs for the people, many articles in the newspapers. And here in this project, crossing the issues between architecture and vulnerability was meaning for us, above all, trying to work on the basis of existing resources, which in this case were not monetary, but human resources, adaptability, hope, sense of community, solidarity, etc. And to make these resources more visible and more variable for everybody. And finally, the fourth project that I would like to talk about is a teaching project that I am conducting with a colleague of the School of Architecture, Paris-La Villette. It's a 1 semester studio for 4th year students that we lead now since 5 years, I think, which seeks to create links between architecture students and inhabitants of social housing neighborhoods around Paris mainly. These neighborhoods are often threatened by big demolition projects, and the inhabitants are often not okay with these demolition projects. We carry out this project with the help and the mediation of the association called Appui, and we have here many members of Appui, and they have presented the association yesterday in another talk. So I have tried to make it short with this. We try to bring the students to use their skills of young architects in interaction with the inhabitants and to work on the basis of the demands and needs of the inhabitants. So we have to engage the students to mobilize their ability to listen, to observe, to formulate some issues, to open their imagination and their capacity to bring people together around creative moments, and to focus their architectural work on how to create places of dialogue, places to meet each other. So we also believe that the presence of the students in the middle of a conflict between, for example, in that kind of places, conflicts between inhabitants and, for example, the social landlords, bringing the students in this situation can move the debate, the conflicts, to the field of collective learning. And it's kind of interesting, many times interesting. I can show you briefly some images here in 2019 in Fresnes, in the south of Paris, a small cinema. We built a small cinema for the neighborhood. And after COVID, this year in 2021, with the wood of the former cinema, we built a small pavilion in Le Blanc-Ménil in north of Paris. Okay, I go very fast. And I conclude, in these 3 projects, we try to address the issue of habitat of vulnerable communities beyond the mechanisms of reproduction of social domination, and it's not so easy. And there is 2 questions I'm still working on and that I would like to share with you now. Perhaps we have time after, I don't know, to discuss them. The first question is in which way the architect is able to move away from his position of power. How can we decentralize? How can we share this power of decision? The second question is how the architect is able day by day promote or to create conditions to empower the people that are concerned about the project he's working on. And when I say people, I'm not only meaning the inhabitants, but also the teams of the project, the workers on the construction site, for example, the students, when there is some, etc. And that's all. I open the two questions to the audience, and I hope we have time to discuss them.
Thank you very much, Meryl. And now I think we can stop sharing. On, yeah. So I asked the organization committee. I'm part of the organization committee, but to have some delay for some question, and we got 10 minutes. So I see in the chat, I don't think we got some question, or there were a question for Nafsika. Okay. To Nafsika Pitsou. Okay. So if you in the audience, you got a question to address to one of the speakers or several of them, maybe, you're really welcome to do so. Even of course, the speakers for each other. Yes, please. We got a microphone, yeah.
Okay, thanks. It's just a very quick question to Dimitra, actually. If are there any cohabitation projects currently in Athens, in Greece? Are there any examples, or it's just kind of collecting the methodology to be able to implement these?
There aren't any. So this was a trigger. There are groups that have approached us, or we've met them on the way, that were interested at some point to develop that. We started working on it, but none, as far as I know, as we know, has advanced. So yes, it's developing methodology and knowledge, support infrastructure, and some kind of imaginary, let's say, about this.
Thank you. Do we have other questions? Of course, from the chat as well, from the people connected.
I want to make a very short comment for some of the presentations and a specific question to Miguel. The comment is that throughout the whole conference, there is a discussion about which kind of projects and which kind of people are really interested into participatory kind of projects. And I am very happy that some of the presentations of this panel raise a very important issue, that there might be some important and interesting projects in Sweden or in another healthy neighborhood or in a very, I don't know, well-organized municipality or whatever. But from my understanding, at least, or from how the organizing committee of the conference is thinking, the main purpose of participatory processes are exactly what these kind of projects are raising: how to find solutions when you don't have money or you don't have the resources to do something better, how you empower communities, even if the end product is not something extremely, I don't know, I mean, it's not something as the quality as an end product, but mainly as a process of doing things. And this is something that I just wanted to mention, that, and I think that you can make your comment on that, that it is mainly something that is coming from the need of mainly marginalized groups and people outside of the typical processes of participation that need this kind of methods. And the second that I wanted to ask, I think Miguel, I don't know the rest of the team, is that I think it's the only project presented in this conference that has something to do, somehow is related, and a big firm. I think it's the only. I mean, most of us are working with small or medium-sized groups, sometimes not even, not even organized as firms or whatever. And from what I saw from your project, somehow Arup was involved, which is something interesting in a way. And I wanted to share us your experience with that, since the typical big consulting and engineering firms, are not typically the ones who are working on this field somehow.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, indeed, Arup joined us in the second phase of the competition. So in the first beginning, they were not into this. When you had this idea to implement or to suggest the idea of integrating the participatory process. Yeah, the participatory process. And actually, Arup was very, for my surprise as well, very open-minded about this and really tried to help us how to could organize more or less the system. But I also have to say that it was more about our team. Arup was more like trying to help us in the technical part of the project, even though they help us a lot with the idea of the parameterization, and they was really into that because they really are into technology but I have to tell you that the most part of the idea of the participatory process was not from Arup. They're participating, they were helping us. They have a lot of people there that can do a lot of stuff. It's unbelievable. They're a huge structure. I was very surprised because they have people to do everything. But we were leading the process and telling them how they could help us. I mean, they were helping us, but we were leading the process. And the most challenging stuff in this competition was to try to convince the client that it's also the train company that this would be possible to be done, to be implemented all over UK. And to be honest, I think in the end they didn't believe us, and that's why maybe they didn't want to take it.
Thank you very much, everybody. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. We got a last question, maybe. Okay, and then, yeah, for everyone present in this room and online, I invite you then to follow the next plenary session international after the last question. So, okay, please.
I would like to ask the last presenter. I'm sorry I didn't hear the start. So if you had already answered that, then I'm sorry to be asking that again. But I would like to ask you if you included the children that lived in the houses during the process of designing their homes, actually.
The second project I've presented is more engaged with the children that were in the shantytown, and there were especially two artists that were especially working with the children, and they were working on the fact that there were difficulties for the children of this shantytown to be included in the school of the city. So there were a big and long-term work between the school, the director of the school, the two artists, the parents, and the parents of the children of the school, and the parents of the children of the shantytown. And finally, at the end, I resume it as a big festival and a big invitation of the children of the school in the shantytown, and we make a Christmas goûter, comment on dit goûter? So anyway, I don't know if I answer your question, but there were in this project in particular a work with the children.
Okay. Didn't start there in the plenary. Okay. So we got as well 3 minutes. Maybe from Dimitra, if you want to say something, to ask something. No? Okay, don't. Okay, Romain. And of course, online, if you want to ask something.
Just I wanted to ask to Meryl if you know what happens to the neighborhoods you worked on it. Like, did they are they already here? And the buildings also, the modulable building. I mean, what happens to them? Because they were faced, they were threatened by eviction, right, or something.
In fact, it's a big shared gardens area, and the self-built houses are kind of disseminated in the area. So it's not a group of houses; it's several small group of houses. And we built the new building in the middle of the area, but not on a place where there were houses before. So we didn't need to evict the houses to construct the new building, but we were very close to it. And if I understand well your question, the deal with the city, the town hall, was that the families that come into the building, they have to destruct their previous house. But in the reality, it doesn't work like that. The houses were taken and transformed by other families that come, and it's an ongoing process. So also a step, as I was explaining on the beginning.
Very good. Okay, thank you, everyone. We can, I think, upload all the panelists. Thank you for following the session. And now it's a plenary session going on in the main room. And I think really interesting one with the international teams coming from Spain, Portugal, UK, Greece. And I think it will be really interesting. Thank you, everyone.